Okay, hello, good afternoon everyone. I'm Roxanne McMeekan from Ing Media and I'd like to welcome you to this very special online event in honour of Stephen Lawrence Day. We're hosting this event along with the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust, which is a charity we're very proud to support. And as I'm sure you'll see in a moment, the topic that we're going to discuss could not be more important amid the pandemic. So on behalf of the Trust and Ing, I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. I believe we've got about 200 of you, which is really amazing. And a huge thank you to our panellists, and particularly to our chair, Claire McCulloch, editor of Building Magazine, who's generously offered to moderate the session and host the recording of the Building website. So with that, I shall hand over to Chloe.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. It's a real pleasure to be here. Just want to welcome everyone again to the online Stephen Lawrence Day debate, the title of which is Diversity in the Built Environment, Staying Focused on Equality. So my name is Claire McCulloch. I'm editor at Building Magazine and I'll be chairing the panel discussion today. Here with me today we have Sonia Watson of the Stephen Lawrence Trust, we have Priya Shah, founder of Bayman Property, and we have Niamoy Fall-Taylor from Purcell. But before I hand over to them, I just want to highlight a couple of themes that I think will come through in the next hour. So for those of you who don't know, today is the second Stephen Lawrence Day after the UK government inaugurated an annual National Day last year to commemorate Stephen, a black 18-year-old aspiring architect who was murdered in an unprovoked racist attack in 1993. So the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust sees this day as a chance to highlight how to help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who want to get into a successful professional career. So inevitably, the coronavirus outbreak has shifted today's focus somewhat, but I think, as we will discuss, in many ways, the crisis has revealed even more starkly the inequalities in our society and brings a new sense of urgency to tackling those underlying problems. So we know that people critically ill with COVID-19 are disproportionately from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. And we also know that the lockdown is having a financial impact on charities like the Stephen Lawrence Trust, who work tirelessly for disadvantaged groups. So that's all very well reported and is a very good reason for us to be discussing these issues today. And that's obviously where our panel comes in. They're about to introduce themselves, but just before they do, I'll just do a bit of housekeeping. So just to let you know that you can post any questions during this session through the Q&A feature on Zoom. So hopefully everyone can see that down at the bottom of your screens. So please do post your questions and we'll do our very best to answer those before we end today. You will also see, obviously, that we are all connecting from home. So hopefully, the technology hasn't let us down so far. Hopefully, we'll all remain connected. If we do drop out for any reason, we will do our very best to connect back in, but bear with us. And just also a reminder that we'll try to end promptly at 4 o'clock. So let's go around our panel with brief introductions before we get stuck into our topic. Sonia, can I start with you?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I was saying to everyone, it appears as though it's only the daily briefing from number 10 that's more popular than this webinar, so it's wonderful to have so many of you on board. I'm the Chief Executive of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust.
Lovely. Priya?
Hi, my name is Prisha. I'm founder of BAME in Property, which is an organisation to help bring more ethnic diversity to the built environment sector. Our focus is twofold, so we really place emphasis on the recruitment of diversity as well as diverse outputs. I'm also a comms consultant at a firm called Grayling, and I work in the built environment there as well.
Thank you. And Niamoy?
Hello, I'm Niamoy Full-Taylor. I work for Purcell Architects, a conservation architect in London. I was a bursary student, a Stephen Lawrence bursary student, and have continued my relationship with the Trust since leaving university. And this year I'm Purcell's charity ambassador. So we've nominated the Stephen Lawrence Trust as our chosen charity to fundraise for and support in other ways this year to start, and hopefully continue that relationship going forward.
Thank you. Okay, so that's our panel. Sonia, I think you've got a presentation for us. So
it's very short. That makes it sound terrible. I promise it's only just a couple of slides that we can follow along from. Everyone can be in touch with us afterwards, and we'll be happy to share anything that we produce here. And I think also Chloe started on this, but there with In Media we did a piece that was picked up, an editorial piece that was picked up by the Times today, which talks a little more about our view of how coronavirus is going to be impacting communities going forward. So and also through Chloe, Building Design magazine as well are featuring some of the very important conversation that we are part of today, which is all about how we can stay focused on equality and what the coronavirus will be doing to impact what is already a very difficult profession to get into if you come from a Black or minority ethnic background. I think now I'm doing some screen sharing here, and hopefully, it's very good. I think it is working. Hold on. Did that work? So let me just start by saying, and Chloe's done a great job at this. There are some things we know. We know that 27 years ago today, Stephen Lawrence was murdered in an unprovoked racist attack. What not everybody knows, though, is that actually around that time he had around about a 1% chance of practicing the profession that he loved. But he had already secured his work experience, and he was about to actually embark on that career. So it was not a pipe dream. That is something that not everybody always does know. What we believe, everyone, regardless of their background, should have the opportunity to succeed in a society that treats them with fairness and respect. How ironic that we are now in a position where we are really understanding that those that come from around the globe are actually keeping this country going, and that equality is something which without which we would not be getting through this pandemic. And therefore it is more important than ever that we make sure that the serious economic consequences for the country do not disproportionately continue to affect those who come from, I'm just reading some lovely messages here that are coming through from you all as well, that we should not allow that disproportionately we continue to do nothing or very little about what it is to make sure that the cultural heritage of people from every background contributes fairly and equally to make sure that we create more of the Priyas of the world who is on the panel today, and to make sure that we are making sure that everyone who wants to be a part or wants to have a career within this profession gets the opportunity to do so. That is what this conversation is about today. So I'm moving on and thinking about the reality. The reality of where we are is that progression rates from part 1 to part 2 and then beyond to part 3 are much lower among students from BAME backgrounds. Less than 7% of registered architects are from a BAME background. And the RIBA have done research very recently, which we started in 2018, where we had 1,000 of you, many of you are on the call today, respond with exactly what they think are the barriers to their progression. and 85%, close to that number, said that their race was. Now, that is something which nobody wants to continue, and which we have to make sure we do not allow the focus to diminish post-pandemic. But we know that the number of architects are falling. We know that projects are going to be impacted. We know that their recruitment will be impacted along the way. But we are here to start that conversation today on Stephen Lawrence Day to make sure that the evidence for more inclusive practice is brought to bear, and we do not allow it to be lessened post-pandemic, because the issue continues to be real, and organisations that rate highly on diversity and inclusion are frankly up to 70% more likely to have success in new markets. And we need to make sure that we drive home that message starting today. I'm not going to say any more. I think we should get going, because we have a lot of you on the call, and obviously have great panelists with us, and I want to make sure that we hear everybody's voice. So thank you all for being part of this. I'm not going to spend time saying the thank yous, but let me just be clear that Ing Media, BD Magazine, all pro bono and all supporting the Trust because they believe that we are doing the right thing, and we need to be around to continue to doing that. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sonia. That was really good points, very passionately and articulately made. I don't know if either Niamoy or Priya, if you want to come in on any of those points before we go to any of the questions from people coming in. Also, we've just got some talking points that we can debate between ourselves before we go over to questions coming in. But Priya, did you want to come in on any of those points?
Yeah, thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Sonia, for your introduction. Fantastic. All I can say is that what this pandemic has shown and is currently showing is that we do completely have a race issue, as Sonia pointed out, but it just goes to show that good housing is absolutely key. And if you don't have people from diverse backgrounds in those actually saying, how does housing suit them, then housing will go wrong. And we are currently seeing it in central London, especially. As we know, central London as a whole has nearly 45% ethnic minority population, with Birmingham being the second most diverse city in the UK. And both of these cities are showing the highest proportion of BAME patients, victims, deaths of the coronavirus. But what we're also seeing is they are living in housing which is often quite cramped. Quite a lot of ethnic minority families live in multi-generational households, so they could have up to 3, potentially even 4, different kind of layers within their family, so grandparents, parents, cousins, children, all living under the same household, making it very difficult to actually follow the government advice of physical distancing, self-isolation. That's very difficult to do. Some of these different communities are very communal in the kind of nature, very inherently communal. So if you think about Muslim communities, for example, they tend to pray together, they eat together, they do all of these things together, but we just haven't thought about that within our housing. And it's currently very evident. Or, some communities live in very, very tiny housing. They don't have balconies, they don't have open space or a garden, which is very common for, your typical middle class family in the UK, who might live in the suburbs, for example. But if you're stuck in central London, you don't have that access to open space, and it completely has an impact on your health and well-being. But if you had the right people, around the project table saying, have you thought about this? Have you thought about the fact that, more family housing, for example, needs to be in certain areas in London which have higher proportions of ethnic minority communities, then we may not be in the situation that we're in right now. And I think we also need to highlight the fact that quite a lot of people from ethnic minority communities are key workers, which is why there is a higher death rate amongst these communities. So it is very synonymous, and I think that needs to be highlighted as well.
Those are really good points there. And I think, often when we've been talking about quality housing, quality social housing, affordable housing, there's been a recognition for quite some time that lots of the tower blocks and things going up have not been adequate or suitable in any case. So do you think the pandemic that we're living through now is just exacerbating problems that we've known about and potentially, hopefully, people might start thinking differently?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, it's completely highlighting the issues. And I would like to think that it will be a catalyst for change. I think we are seeing evidently that people are living in very challenging circumstances, and just the kind of lack of open space and the overcrowded conditions have really highlighted this. So you would hope that design moving forward will take this into consideration. I think having access to open space is absolutely key, but also having good ventilation within the homes. I mean, imagine if we were in the peak of summer, you know, at 33 degrees like we had last year, and everyone was told to stay indoors. It would be very difficult for someone who was living, you know, in a 2-bedroom flat with 8 members in their household. So I think we do need to take that into consideration. It's not just access to open space, but it's also, you know, kind of architecture within the home as well. So all of this comes into consideration, and I think there are lots of these debates going on around the world. Actually, it's not just in the UK. I know in India, for example, in slums, they're already thinking about how it's so important to incorporate good design, so that moving forward, if we are going to be faced with another pandemic, which is very likely, just given how interconnected we are and, you know, the impact on climate change and everything, we will need to start thinking about good housing because it's completely interlinked.
Yeah, great points. Nia Moy, I don't know if you want to come in on any of those points that we've made so far.
Yeah, I suppose just to reiterate what Priya was saying, it's just hopefully this really drives people to take it as a high priority and make sure that the people who are in these situations are being thought of at the forefront rather than dismissed because it's not at the top of everyone's priority lists.
Yeah, great. I'm just going to put a quick reminder to people who are watching and listening. If you could use the Q&A function to post questions. I can see people are perhaps using the chat function. I'm just worried that I might lose your questions in that, whereas the Q&A is a bit easier for us to manage. So if you have got questions, try and pop them on the Q&A panel. But it's great to see people interacting, and we'll definitely come to your questions very soon. But just to broaden out our discussion a little bit beyond the pandemic, to some of the underlying issues, the things that the Stephen Lawrence Day would have focused on and is maybe brought into more light anyway, you know, questions of how are we doing on diversity generally? What sense of progress do you feel that is being made, Sonia? You know, can you give us any sort of context to how we're doing? Because when you put those figures out there of, I think you said only 7% of registered architects are from BAME backgrounds, that sounds pretty bad to me, but I don't know where we're coming from in terms of timescale. Is that an improvement? How are we doing?
Well, let's contextualize that because and brace ourselves, because the actual practicing architects is probably about half that. Registered is very different to those who are actually practicing, and so bringing it back to why we're talking about this today. I talked earlier around about, try and be precise, about 1.6% of a chance of Stephen becoming an architect in real terms as a practicing architect. 27 years later, it's not that different. So 7% translates to probably about half that in terms of practicing architects. Now, the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust is the only charity of its kind that, of course, does not focus only on the built environment, but across the piece as well. But the built environment is where our heart will always beat, because that is why his family founded the charity. So the way that we make that difference is by making sure that we offer a bursary fund. Last year we managed to persuade universities to create £150,000 worth of scholarships for those who want to study various forms of architecture and indeed other professions. We also have a bursary pot that the RIBA ran a fantastic dinner that many of you were at, where we were able to make sure that bursary pot worked. We also run social value programs, which mean that for those organizations, property developers, architects who get these fantastic big urban development projects and contracts, a proportion of that goes towards social value projects, which mean that we can make sure that we are helping to increase inclusion and diversity and build the bursary pot in specific areas. So there are a number of things that we are doing, but let me be clear that we are a charity of 8.6 full-time equivalent people, okay? So yes, we do punch way above our weight. Stephen Lawrence Day alone shows that. We're up to 300,000 impressions pretty much on Twitter around the day. So at the end of the day, we know that what we are doing works, but we need to do more, and we need to go across the built environment, because we have colleagues here today are talking about obviously construction, obviously we're talking about property and so on. All of those areas that worryingly hit the areas around the pandemic and making us actually, in order for us to hit the markers that you hear politicians speak about, is going to be even more difficult as the weeks go on because of cultural difference. And yet, conversely, it is those from around the world that are saving the lives of those within the health service. So at the end of the day, when we're looking at what needs to be done and what can be done differently, yes, we've created well over 150 practicing architects. Yes, we make sure that we're offering mentoring, bursaries, placements through our Building Futures program that many of you are part of. And I think that's wonderful. And we will always have examples of that. But to make wholesale change, then what we need to do is to make sure that what we are offering goes, bats away artificial barriers like affordability, like the ability to actually secure work experience, and getting a fair crack at the whip for real career chances. So there are many things that need to be done, all of which we are doing, we are touching on, but we cannot do it all. And this conversation helps to raise awareness for what can be done to make sure that everybody is part of designing the world that we live in, to avoid some of the issues that you've heard both Priya and Niamh would start to speak about today.
Yeah, just on the point about bursaries, because I think someone's touched on this in one of the questions coming in, just about the affordability. You know, obviously training to become an architect, it takes a very long time. The course is very expensive, and just there are racial barriers, but there are also affordability barriers.
Right.
And just to your point, Niamh, you benefited from the bursary scheme. Could you just talk to us a little bit around that and how that's helped you and your experiences of it?
Yes. Well, I was granted the Stephen Lawrence bursary in 2008, which was phenomenal. It was it had such a huge impression on myself and my career going forward, and how I kind of go about my work and who I interact with. I received, I don't know whether it's the same now, but I received £3,000 a year for the undergraduate course, which is 3 years, and it was I would not have been able to do the course without it. I think many of people who have done the course will understand the pressures compared to other courses, of the expense of it, and feeling like you have to always have the best of the best, not necessarily equipment, but when you present your work, you have to present it to the best of your ability. And most of the time that comes down to affordability, which is very, very challenging. Regardless of where you come from, that is challenging. So having the bursary support, not only financial, but also through mentorship and being able to use the trust's facilities, whether that's through printing or just a space to be and a place that you know that you can kind of go to for that support, was just phenomenal.
That's great.
So I think to add to that, I mean, it was pretty good then, Niamh, but since Gensler got their hand on the Stephen Lawrence Centre, it is a stunning resource, and we have over 100 practices now who we have shored up the Building Futures programme such that it is pretty mind-blowing now. We have a class, and we have class of 2019-20 we're up to, you are joined now by approximately 152 young people who have benefited for, actually, you asked, from varying amounts. But remember, for all of those on this webinar, all publicly funded. We are being hit hard because, rightly, the focus for donations and charitable funding for the foreseeable future will be on frontline support, which obviously we are also involved with. But again, another reason why we need to raise the profile of this discussion today is because 100% of those donations go to individuals like Nyamoe, in order to help them to study and none of them would be able to complete their studies without that support. They still need to get the loans, the student loans, in the same way, but it's a course that requires a hell of a lot of additional expense. And if anyone wants to know more, then just come find us afterwards, and we'll tell you all about where we are now.
That's great. And just moving it on, so there's the bursary part, but then Nyamoe, you know, as a young person going into the profession, what do you think young people need? What support do they need at that stage? So you may have done your course and you've got all of the academic background, but what kind of support do you need for actually going out and, you know, practicing as an architect and finding a job, frankly?
Well, I suppose the main thing, when I graduated from undergrad, it was 2010, we were in the middle of a recession, no one was hiring, it was pretty soul destroying, really. It felt like all the people with jobs had who were architects or who had family connections or something like that. It was always,
well, we're getting a little bit of interference.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, it felt like you could only get a job if you knew the right person. So for me at that time, I didn't actually manage to get an architecture job. I got lots of work experience, which was great, and that helped me to go forward, and that was through the Stephen Lawrence Trust. They kind of connected me with the architects that they're affiliated with. So I actually went back to do my master's after not having that critical 1 year in practice, which then, when I was back at university, it was a real shock to the system, because you need that experience. You need that year in practice to learn and get all the skills to continue with the rest of the course, and it's set out like that for a reason. So it was a struggle, but I suppose after that, the skills that that you kind of get through the course and through work experience is kind of what has been able to kind of give me the confidence to carry on and keep going in the industry.
And do you have any advice for, you know, prospective, you know, employers out there who are looking at the next intake? What support can they give?
I did go to a few kind of open practice days, which I think that is a really, really fantastic way of saying, look, we are hiring. It might not be today, but we will be hiring, and we want graduates, and open it to send the invitations out to all the universities, to even pre-university kind of sixth form colleges, and say, come in, see what we do, get people excited about it, because that really, then you feel included. And I think that is one of the main things, and especially for myself, you want to feel like you are included and you are part of this club, as it feels like sometimes. So having that open door kind of policy, and then if you have that, then you will get people who will apply, and then you can take it from there, and you'll get that breadth of diversity from doing that. I think that would be really, really good.
Yeah, Great, thank you for that. Priya, do you have any points on that point about what businesses can do to make people feel included, to reach out in the right way?
So many things, and it doesn't really have to be all kind of big financial things. It can really be something as small as making sure that your website is diverse and representative of everyone who works in the company. On so many occasions, I've gone onto a company's website and only seen their just their kind of chief executive and directors on their website, and this unfortunately gets less and less diverse the higher up you go in a company. So if I'm only seeing, dare I say, white men on a company website, I'm not going to think to myself that I can see myself in that company. It's so important to, ensure that you've got diverse mixed people who work in the company on your website, from those who are graduates and entry levels, because they are so crucial to a company. Without the kind of next talent pool, how is your company going to flourish? So make sure you showcase them and show people who are looking to join your company that, I am going to put these people here because they have made it. And I think other things that companies can do is ensuring that they've got, diverse people who are interviewing in the process. We've all got unconscious bias. It's very inherent. We've all got it. So I think it's just important that, if you are interviewing someone, make sure you've got more than one person. If you can have 2 to 3 people, that's even better. Have a male, have a female, have an ethnic minority if possible. It just removes that inherent unconscious bias, and we are all thinking about that person that we're interviewing in different ways, and we'll all kind of share different perspectives as a result of it. Other things that companies can do is mix up their socials, because quite a lot of company socials tend to be centered around drinking and alcohol, especially in the property industry. I know that for sure, which is why I set up BAME in Property, because I used to go to lots of networking events very early on in my career, and I felt very excluded because there is a certain type of person that goes to those kind of drinking socials, goes skiing, and yes, I am labeling a stereotype, but it just wasn't me, and I didn't fit into that kind of group. So one of the things that I ensure is that my networking events tend to have a good balance of alcohol, non-alcoholic drinks, tend to have more vegetarian food, making sure that they're at times which really tend to accommodate 4 different people in communities and genders. So don't only have evening events, because if people have childcare responsibilities, they may not be able to attend. Similarly with breakfast events, if you've got a school drop-off in the morning, you may not be able to attend a breakfast event. So you're really losing key voices in the industry who might be able to contribute so much into these discussions that are so interesting and that take place across the industry. So it is really, really small things, making sure that you've got a diverse panel at an event. That's absolutely key. I personally won't speak on a panel event if it's not representative of the industry, or if it doesn't have at least a female, at least an ethnic minority. I think that's so key. And ironically, that ethnic minority is usually me, and I don't just want to be talking about diversity, though I can talk about that. But obviously I've got my own expertise in my own areas that I work in, and I want to be able to showcase that. Don't just ask the black person to speak on the panel and talk about diversity. They've got their own expertise. So, I think those are the things that as an industry we can be doing, and we should be doing, and it doesn't cost anything, and it benefits everybody. So yeah, and there's a whole host of other things that we can do. I really could go on.
No, but that's really great. That's a great start. I can see, Sonia, you're wanting to jump in there.
Well, very, 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 very quickly, just a couple of points to pick up. Number one, it would be remiss of me with an audience like this not to speak about the groundbreaking partnership that we've made with Urban, formerly known as Stride, who will be our recruitment partner going forward. So watch this space as well, so that some of those issues around unconscious bias, we can give that advisory work on. And actually, the beauty of it is that the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust receives a donation for every successful placement for real jobs. So I've seen in the comments, part 1s need to be paid. Yes, they will. Yeah, absolutely. Chloe, they're coming up in some of the comments box there outside the Q&A. Okay. Absolutely. And I think that's really important, plus a partnership with the London Marathon, so that students, as you were both referring to, across the country, for all 26-mile markers going forward, forget the pandemic and all the craziness in terms of timing, but we now have that partnership with them that went through the full university system to design the mile marker that to be seen by up to 1 billion people around the world. So, as you rightly say, opportunities is not just about the money side of it, but also the exposure and the confidence building as well. I think that's really important. But yeah, no, it's wonderful to hear you both speaking about that. And I think it's so important when we're talking about that the black person isn't always the expert on diversity, and that you come with your own set of experiences and so on. And so I have a number of letters after my name. None of them are because I'm black. So I think it's very important that we look at the reasons why people are contributing to the professions that they're in, and that's not that's part of who you are, but it does not define you.
Okay, so we've had some really good tips and suggestions about how to be better at this. But Priya, maybe, I mean, not to be too negative, but why aren't we doing better then? People, you know, none of this is rocket science. What's holding the industry back, and what would be a game changer, do you think?
I think there are so many reasons. I think you've got to know about the industry first to actually enter it. And if you think about school careers talks, I mean, when I was at school, I did my GCSE just over 10 years ago, embarrassingly showing my age, and I didn't have any careers talks from, you know, anyone in the built environment industry. I had, if I was lucky, a doctor and a lawyer and a pharmacist, and, you know, my dad even said to me, why don't you become a pharmacist? And I said no. And again, this is, you know, a very related issue, that if you are from a certain community, often Asian or, you know, black, whatever, you are presented with a very kind of narrow array of careers, you know, such as law, medicine, finance, accountancy, and, you know, these are very well-known professions. And it's often because our parents kind of age don't necessarily know about careers in the property world. And, you know, there's surveyors, there's planners, there's architects, heritage consultants. And I think it just goes to show that if you don't know about these careers, you're not necessarily going to encourage your children to go into them. And obviously children are so influenced by their parents and those around them, that if you aren't presented with them, you're just going to go into them. I think the other issue is obviously how big your network is, and this was one of the comments that I read in the chat by someone, is, you know, how do you get into the network and go about your networking. You know, some people are very fortunate that they've got parents or friends, or, you know, dad's friend works at Savills or Knight Frank, and they can get that internship for 2 weeks, and that's already got them that foot in the door. But if you don't have those connections, how do you get that foot in the door? So I think it's really, really important to kind of make sure that people are given those opportunities very early on in their, you know, in their education. So going to kind of, the 16 to 18 year old bracket is extremely key. Not just going to university, because by that point people have, you know, already made their choice, or are, you know, far more into their kind of thinking about where they want to go with their careers. Whereas if you go to them at 16 or 17 or 18, you're actually saying to them, you know, have you considered something in the built environment industry? And I think that's absolutely key. So it's about, you know, kind of changing your parents' perception, but also, you know, broadening the network and giving those opportunities when it comes to work experience and internship as well, because that is absolutely key.
Okay, and then just taking it from the other perspective, you know, the benefits to the business case basically for diversity. I don't know if you want to talk on that point, Priya, or
I can touch very briefly on that before it's passed into to someone else. But a few years ago, research by a McKinsey & Company showed that, you know, companies which have executive board levels with more diverse people in, that's ethnic diversity, outperform their competitors by 35%, and that is quite a large figure, not something that we should just kind of brush over. So I think it's really important that you do hire diverse people, because what you get is diversity in thought. And I've often had people say back to me, but you can get diversity in thought from anyone, you know, but it's all about shared, you know, it's all about different experiences and backgrounds and upbringing, and everyone has different upbringing. If you've grown up in, you know, the kind of inner cities of London, you know, all around kind of Indian people or Bangladeshi people, your life and your upbringing is going to be very different to someone who's grown up in the leafy suburbs of Surrey. And I think that is extremely important when it comes to housing and development, especially because so much of our housing and planning in London is centred around the redevelopment of brownfield sites, the regeneration of inner city we need to have those voices around the table. If we don't know how to relate and to communicate with the people on the ground, we are not understanding them. We are actually, really isolating them and pushing them away. And given that there's so much resistance to development anyway, surely it makes sense to have the right people behind the table.
Yeah. Other panel members want to jump in there? That seems a pretty powerful point to me.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the point is powerful. We could, what I won't do in the time we have left is quote a whole range of other statistics at everyone in terms of the business benefit to diversity. This is not a nice to have; it's a need to have. What is the business case is clear. I'm very happy to send people a précis of all the statistics that back that up. But frankly, if we don't, and when we don't, going forward, we start to see issues across the business or this. Look at where we are with the pandemic. We will not recover well enough if we don't include. If inclusion isn't at the heart of recruitment going forward, and this economy will not recover. It's that simple. It will not recover from a health perspective, and it will not recover from a business perspective. And of course, we haven't for a while, but let's not forget Brexit. There is no secret as to why the Commonwealth is becoming a little bit more popular again in political circles in terms of visiting from politicians, royal family and so on. It's because actually one needs to protect the workforce and include others from other diaspora who would come and work in this country, and we are going to need to change our attitude around that. Also, from a practical perspective, if we go back to the built environment, if you are looking at the whole good growth by design issue from the London Mayor, if we're talking from a London-centric perspective, if you are not able to evidence where inclusion and diversity is part of your business case as a developer, then you will not get the gig. So at the end of the day, there is something very practical about inclusion, as well as the hearts and minds of making sure that we represent everyone's views, particularly when it comes to the way that we live and how we live and the spaces we design.
Yeah, you touched on a point there that I was going to bring up, which comes down to a bit of intervention from government or local authorities. Do you think we need to see more action at a government level to ensure more equality in opportunities in terms of entering the built environment?
I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it at if you will, at a local government level. So the Mayor of London is being very, very active in this space in terms of making it part of the bids that are going for large urban regeneration projects. Whether large-scale government through DCLG, the Department of Culture, Media, and so on, or local government will make that kind of intervention, it's unlikely. Historically, but what we do have, we have Heritage England, Historic England, and we have very, very large players in the sector who are starting to lobby government in terms of saying, if we don't, and actually let's bring in something like the Grenfell inquiry, yeah, because listening to the voices of community who live in those spaces, those voices were not listened to at its most basic level, without trying to get into the complexities of that issue, but that is part of it. And so they're at a central government level, yes, there are conversations. Whether they filter down soon enough, I think that has to hit the bottom line.
Yeah. But from what I get from you, you're saying politicians are listening. They're in listening mode.
Yeah, they're having to. Having to.
Yeah,
they never will, but at the end of the day, they are being driven by economics.
Yeah, and we've obviously touched on the pandemic and how that makes a lot of these underlying issues even more important to tackle. But also the flip side of that is that there's a risk that they could derail the agenda that focuses on the immediacy. And as you said, Sonia, we can all understand why the focus is on emergency services, hospitals, frontline workers. But do you worry that the diversity agenda could get derailed?
Well, look, recession always has considerable impact on aspiration and opportunities. We start to, and this is why this debate is so important to all of us here today. One sees regression. That is the biggest risk. The biggest risk will be one of regression, because labour market conditions are going to change, and therefore we start to fall back into the old chestnut of employing those we know and who we know and so on. So that influence will start to rear its very unattractive head, and those from better off backgrounds will survive and will get the opportunities, and that's something that we need to tackle, and at least continue to raise awareness of, so that we don't get left behind and start to see ourselves going backwards. Because placements, work experience, all the things that we've heard about today, they decline. They decline in a challenged market, and we don't have to be at the end of the pandemic to know very clearly that we will start to have a high risk of some of those attitudes and behaviours coming back to the fore before we have made enough progress to cope. So we need to keep pushing forward.
All right. Well, look, thanks for that, Sonia. I think we have been dipping into some of the topics raised in the chat and also in questions, but we might now look at some specific ones. So I'm just having a quick look through. Anyone from the panel also jump in if you have seen a question that you have a burning desire to answer. But I think so. Oh, this is quite an interesting one. What can we do more to integrate equality and social mobility within future developments and master plans? Does anyone want to speak to that point?
Yeah, I will. I can.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Stab at that. I think when it comes down to those kind of those different kind of aspects, so important to get your engagement right. So this is even before the development has even been built. You know, I work in community engagement, and a large part of my work is, you know, working with different stakeholders, be it political, to different community groups, but so important to reach out to diverse groups and those so-called hard to reach groups, because these are the ones who are very difficult to get, you know, the opinions of, but are so necessary and so important to ensure that a development works for everyone. For example, you know, if you've got a development with very narrow spaces in between rooms or the corridors, and you've got someone who's a wheelchair user, they may not be able to kind of get through like that. That's extremely important. Or you know, if you've got someone you know, who's from like a lower socioeconomic background and also from a BAME community, bearing in mind that these are very synonymous, then they're going to have very different views to, you know, someone who is going to come to your traditional village hall consultation, which is, you know, generally how planners and developers do their consultation. So I think it's really important to be innovative and creative about how we reach out to people, and something that I'm doing at the moment, just with some of the clients and projects that I'm working on in this kind of COVID-19 era that we're in. You know, we're doing a lot more virtual engagement. We're using the tools that everyone is using on a daily basis, such as Zoom. We're holding virtual events on Zoom. We're holding workshops. We're holding, you know, lunches where, you know, everyone has their own lunch while we all kind of talk about a development and a plan. And I think that's really important. That's how you're going to reach out to people and get those views, which will, you know, really influence a development.
That's great. So thank you for that question. I think that came from Alfonso. I'm just looking, Rebecca's got a question, which I think goes to the heart of certain problems within the built environment, which is, you know, she's saying it's a fragmented industry, and there are lots of organisations that are working on skills, careers, diversity, social value. I guess her point is, is that part of the problem, that there's not a real sort of central drive to tackle these issues, that there's lots of individual initiatives and it's not very linked up? What's the panel's thoughts on that? Do we need to get more organised as a sector? Naomi, I don't know if you've got any views on, you know, coming into the industry, did it feel like there were lots of different entry points, lots of different organisations out there, no one organisation speaking to young people?
No, I didn't feel that at all. I definitely felt like I was on my own, really.
Right.
And going through, I just remember sitting with a notebook full of practices that I was keen on working for, and starting at the top and calling and knocking doors, and it was, yeah, it was tough.
So actually, from your perspective, what you're saying is maybe the more the merrier. It almost doesn't matter if it's not joined up.
No.
That so long as the message is getting out there, that's the most important point at this stage, and maybe further down the line, we maybe get a bit more organised and centralised in our outreach approach.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think reading through some of the comments, I think it's definitely important to start early. I think universities kind of not too late, but you by the time you get there, you know why you're at university. You know what career you want to kind of pursue. So it needs to start a lot younger. So the conversation starts earlier. Okay,
great. We have got a lot here. There's one specifically to do with housing and working from home. I guess this is something that a lot of us are having to deal with right now. Do you reckon recruiters now have another layer of lifestyle to consider when hiring someone? So if we are talking about working from home more, actually could that disadvantage certain people? I think that might be the assumption behind the question. Sonia, I don't know if you want to jump in there.
I it's really important, and we've been hearing about this a great deal. Not everybody has the facility to sit in their home and do what we're doing. I think this is something that's really important. I don't like to give him a shout out too often, but my husband works in education. He's an ex-head teacher, and he now looks after hundreds of schools across London from an advisor perspective. And if you only look at the young people who need support in the school environment, it goes right up the economic level as to whether or not they can even be homeschooled. All this talk about homeschooling and so on. Actually, there are hundreds and thousands of young children in school today. They were in school over Easter because they cannot be homeschooled. They do not have the facilities to learn at home, and their schools would not be able to teach them remotely. So this is something which does, there is a them and us about that. I think that's very, very important. So that again creates an artificial barrier where there is an assumption across this country that everybody can access Zoom or Teams and work from home, and that teachers have the ability to teach remotely. That is not something which levels the playing field at all, and that whole intersection of education and the labour market therefore starts to be disrupted, is what we're seeing very soon. And when Nyamoy talks about intervening much earlier, of course, again, we are seeing a backward step, therefore, in young people's education. That for some, that gap in their education will not be closed. And that is for many of the young people and the schools work that we do going forward. But Nyamoy, you will be heartened to know after all of that that the RIBA will be funding an officer working for me to expand their schools program across the country, because you're absolutely right, we must do that a lot earlier. So that will be a wonderful thing. I thought I'd better end on a high note from that last piece of last conversation. But yeah, we are starting. There are the divisions can be more, not less, if we're not careful.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm noticing people are putting in points about the need for good broadband is really vital. That's vital infrastructure now for people, and not everybody has it. So that can be a barrier for people. Just looking down some of the questions, gosh, there are so many. It's hard to do justice to all of this, but there's a point about is the structure of architectural education a specific problem, and what are your thoughts on new routes to professional qualifications, as in is the apprenticeship program something that the architecture profession should be looking at more carefully? That's a question from John. I don't know if anyone wants to pick up. Naomi, you've been through the architecture qualification process, which is a lengthy one. What are your thoughts?
I think there should be more than one way to qualify. I think that is evident from going through the education system and trying to also go about doing work experience and working in practice. There should definitely be different ways of getting to that end point, being a qualified architect, because the traditional route does not work for everyone, and it can't work for everyone, and that's why it's such a challenge. And also that's why it takes it's a long course already, but it can take a lot longer, and I suppose the good thing about it is you can do it over a long number of years, but then during that time you're studying, working all at the same time without having that professional accreditation, which is also associated with your earning potential. So you can stretch it out for as long as you like, but you are not earning what you should be earning after all that education and everything that you've put into it. So yes, through apprenticeships, I think would be an excellent way of doing it, and it not be seen as lesser than the university route.
Yeah, that's the problem, that there's a stigma attached to apprenticeships as opposed to going to university, and there's possibly quite a bit of work to do to give apprenticeship status. Keith has also just followed up on that point a bit to do with what you were talking about, Naomi, about salaries, that actually the cost of an architecture degree versus the end salary that the profession can expect. Possibly that might also lead to parents not being that keen for their.
Well, I don't know if people know. I think people assume that architects get paid a lot of money, but they don't. But that all comes hand in hand. Yeah, I think the awareness of that is very important, but also they should be paid more.
Yeah, exactly. And also just one sort of side issue, there's another question coming in here about just the knowledge that secondary schools have about opportunities in the built environment. I mean, do we need to educate the educators?
Yeah, just to kind of jump in there, I do think so. Just kind of going back to the point I made earlier, I was presented with a very limited set of careers at school, and this was by my actual careers, kind of staff at my school. But it also depends on which school you go to. I went to the comprehensive school down my road, whereas I think that private schools and grammar schools tend to have better access to this information just because of the type of people that go to these schools. Often schools will invite the parents of pupils to come and give a careers talk, and you've often got a far more diverse pool to kind of pick from and present from. So I think it's twofold in the sense that yes, we do need to do more outreach work to schools, but we really need to target those schools in the inner cities, the comprehensive schools who are very unlikely to know about careers in the built environment, assuming that those who are more privileged, and are going to private schools have better access to information and those types of careers. And the network to actually get the work experience. I think, coinciding with the careers talks, there kind of needs to be an offer of, work experience. You can't just go into a school and say, these are all great, these are great opportunities, and then, kind of not have anything else for people to then kind of follow up with. So I know that if I was going to go and give a careers talk at a school, I would really want to say that my company offers 2 weeks work experience, which it does, and I think that's really, really fantastic. And it's so important for people to have that opportunity to actually follow up and to do something like that, because without that, your careers talk has just presented information, it's not given an opportunity.
Yeah, very, very valuable. We're down to the last 2 minutes, and I want to give that to Sonia. This has just flown by. But I want to give that to Sonia because there have been lots of comments on the chat and in the Q&A just asking how they can support the Stephen Lawrence Trust. What's the way to help? So over to you, Sonia.
Very, very quickly, thank you for a wonderful discussion. And I will, in 10 seconds, just point out we just had the most brilliant schools workshops hosted by HKS at the trust. Over 50 young kids, all from schools who would certainly have never heard of this as architecture as a profession. So we can help with anyone out there who wants to host one of those. And Alfonso, I think Alfie's on the call today, so I can throw them all over the fence. He's done a brilliant Into Architecture toolkit and so on as well. But, you know, in terms of supporting the trust, let's be clear and speak like it is. We are struggling along with every other small charity at the moment because of the diversion of funding. So if no donation is too small, our overhead is very low. We're trying to build our bursary pot again, and we need to survive this pandemic in the same way anyone else does. So if anyone is in a position to support us, whether that be via donation or indeed via our programs, of course we will always welcome that. We've made it through since the inauguration of the charity by Baroness Lawrence in 1998, so this is we're up to our 22nd year. We're not looking to go down yet. We're certainly not without a fight, but this is presenting a lot of challenges to us, and conversations like this make a huge difference. We rely on public support for everything that we do. So if there's if anyone is thinking of donating in any way after the front line, because I'm with you, I think that's the most important thing. But once you've fulfilled those promises to yourself, then always consider us. And I always leave with one comment: if you see an ad on TV for a charity, they can do without your money for just one donation. Find a small charity that you can donate to that will evidence making a difference in a real practical way, where 100% of what you donate goes to them.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you so much to Niamoy and to Priya for today's chat. It really has flown by, and we didn't have enough time to get through all of them.
No.
I'm really sorry about that, but thank you everyone who did post a question.
Fantastic.
And thanks for a really great discussion, and best of luck with the rest of Stephen Lawrence Day. I know you've got a really busy day, Sonia, so thank you for spending
We
it.
are all over the place, guys. We're in the top 10 in the world on social at the moment, so you will all see the results of that. We'll be publishing all of that later, if any of my staff are still speaking to me at the end of today, because they're spending all their time atting everybody and sharing stuff. So please follow us on Insta and all the channels, because it's a wonderful day that I didn't think would be even more powerful than last year, but certainly looks like that's going to be the case. And we do it all for the young people who want to join us in this wonderful profession, and also for the communities that we all serve and are part of. So yeah, it's a lovely day, and this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for your time.
Okay, well look, thanks very much.
And thank you, Chloe, for wonderful sharing.
It's been very, very interesting. So thank you very much, everybody, and that's it for today. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.